Claire Montgomery never thought her dream wedding would become a public nightmare. She sat at the altar in her custom-designed white dress, delicate lace draped around the wheels of her chair. Her heart pounded with hope until her fiancé stepped back, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I can't do this. I can't marry someone like you." The crowd gasped. She felt every stare like a dagger, every whisper like fire in her veins. And just when she thought the humiliation couldn't go any deeper, the church doors slammed open. In walked Jack Callahan, the man whose name alone made CEOs flinch. A billionaire with a brutal reputation. A ghost from a world no one dared speak about. He didn't say a word. He just walked up the aisle, lifted Claire into his arms, and carried her out, leaving everyone frozen in stunned silence. Who was he? Why her? And what kind of man crashes a wedding just to steal the bride? What happened next shattered everything Claire thought she knew, about her past, about love, and about the man who would burn down the world just to keep her safe. You won't believe where this story leads. Claire Montgomery never had it easy. She was just 3 years old when a drunk driver ran a red light and left her an orphan and a paraplegic. The crash didn't just take her parents, it took her ability to walk. Doctors diagnosed her with permanent spinal cord damage. From that moment on, Claire's world became one of hospitals, pitying glances, and a childhood spent navigating a world never built for her. But Claire? She was a fighter. She taught herself how to take up space in rooms that tried to shrink her down. How to be smarter, louder, braver than the people who whispered behind her back. She aced her way through high school, earned a scholarship to a state university, and landed a job at a non-profit helping children with disabilities, children who looked at her and saw hope instead of limitation. That's where she met Andrew Blake. Andrew was the kind of man who knew how to charm a room, clean-cut, a rising young architect, and seemingly unbothered by Claire's wheelchair. At first, it felt like magic. He held her hand in public. Told his friends she was the strongest woman he'd ever met. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, Claire actually believed the universe was finally throwing her a bone. He told her, "Your chair doesn't matter to me. You're everything I've ever wanted." But standing there in front of 100 guests, friends, colleagues, even clients, he showed his true face. Andrew looked at Claire in her ivory wedding dress, custom designed to drape beautifully over her chair, and stepped back. "I can't do this," he said. There was no warning. No tears. No explanation beyond a cold, heartless declaration, "I can't marry someone like you." The silence in the church was deafening. The whispers started immediately. Someone gasped. Someone else pulled out their phone. Claire sat there frozen, paralyzed in every way, as the man who once swore he'd love her forever turned his back and walked away. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a betrayal broadcast live, a humiliation so sharp it felt like her very existence had been put on trial and publicly found unworthy. And the worst part? Claire believed him. In that moment, she believed maybe she was too much. Too complicated. Too broken. But then, the doors opened. And a man stepped in. Tall. Cold. Dangerous. The kind of man no one dared speak about above a whisper. Claire didn't know his name, yet. But she could feel it in the air, in the way every head turned and every breath got caught in every throat. Something was about to change. She just didn't know yet that this stranger had known her all along. The oak doors at the back of the church slammed open with a thunderous crack, silencing every gasp and whisper like a divine command. Heads turned. A few guests instinctively stood. And then, he walked in. Jack Callahan. Even if you'd never met him, you knew him. He was the kind of man whose reputation walked 5 feet ahead of him. Billionaire. Ex-military. Rumors of black ops, defense contracts, secret files, and enemies who simply disappeared. The kind of man who hadn't been seen in public in years, but whose name still made boardrooms clench and politicians sweat. And now he was walking straight down the aisle of Claire Montgomery's shattered wedding. No one said a word. No one moved. The air itself seemed to shift around him, charged, heavy. Jack wore a charcoal gray suit that looked custom-built for intimidation. His face was carved in stone, unreadable, jaw tight, eyes locked not on the groom, not on the priest, but on Claire. He didn't glance at the crowd. Didn't ask permission. He didn't have to. And then, without a word, he did the unthinkable. He stepped up to the altar, bent down, and scooped Claire up into his arms as if she weighed nothing, like the broken moment she was living didn't matter because he had already decided how it would end. "What are you doing?" Claire gasped, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck. The room tilted, her world spinning for the second time that day. "Putting an end to this circus," Jack replied, his voice low, sharp, final. Andrew, the man who had just humiliated her in front of everyone she knew, stood frozen. "Hey, what the hell? Who are you?" Jack didn't even glance at him. To everyone's shock, including Claire's, he turned and walked back down the aisle with her in his arms. The church that had been filled with judgmental eyes moments ago was now a sea of stunned silence. No one tried to stop him. Not the priest. Not the guests. Not even Andrew, who stepped aside like a coward in a tuxedo. Outside, a black SUV waited at the curb, engine running. Jack's men stood like shadows, their eyes scanning every movement, their hands twitching near their jackets, armed, controlled, dangerous. One of them silently opened the back door. Jack climbed in, still carrying Claire like some reverse fairy tale ending. As the car pulled away from the church, leaving behind wilted flowers, half-whispered gossip, and a broken ceremony, Claire sat in stunned silence, her heart pounding. "I don't even know you," she whispered. Jack finally looked down at her. His eyes were colder than steel but burned with something deeper. "You will." And that's how the girl who was abandoned became the woman no one would ever dare touch again. The SUV moved like a shadow through the city, dark-tinted windows hiding Claire from a world she no longer recognized. Claire sat upright, her crumpled wedding dress pooling awkwardly around her legs, heart still pounding from the chaos she'd just been plucked out of. She watched Jack Callahan in the seat beside her, silent and unreadable, like a statue carved out of secrets. He hadn't said another word. And she had no idea where they were going. City streets gave way to suburbs. Suburbs gave way to woods. Then, just as Claire opened her mouth to demand answers, the road curved and revealed a gated driveway flanked by cameras and armed guards. The steel gates opened without hesitation. That's when it hit her, this wasn't a house. It was a compound. The SUV wound up a hill, finally stopping before a modern stone and glass estate that looked more like a military safe house than a billionaire's home. The place was massive, sleek, cold. Every angle said, "You are not welcome unless I say you are." Jack opened the car door, reached for her, and without asking, lifted her into his arms again. "I can walk," she said sharply. "No, Claire," he replied coolly. "You roll. And your chair's still in the trunk." She hated that he was right. Inside, the mansion was a blend of high-tech and old-world luxury, bulletproof windows, antique floors, leather furniture, and an army of quiet staff who barely glanced at her before melting into the walls. He carried her into a private suite and finally placed her on a velvet sofa. Her wheelchair was wheeled in by one of the guards, clean, unfolded, ready. Claire blinked. "What is this place?" she asked. "Home," Jack said. "And now, your safe house." "Safe from what?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Jack's jaw tightened. "From the people who would hurt you because of me." Claire stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "I don't even know you." "You will," he said again, softer this time. "But right now, all you need to know is that you're protected." Protected. The word sounded like a threat and a promise all at once. She looked around the room, perfect, impenetrable, pristine, and for the first time, truly understood, she wasn't just some girl he'd saved on a whim. She was involved now, tied to something far bigger than she realized. And she had no idea what Jack Callahan had just dragged her into. But one thing was clear. This wasn't about romance. It was about control, secrets, and maybe something Claire didn't even know she'd lost. Yet. The next morning, Claire woke up in a room that looked like it belonged in a luxury resort, vaulted ceilings, silk bedding, handcrafted furniture, but all she felt was tension wrapping around her like a second skin. Jack hadn't come to see her, but his presence was everywhere. Her closet was full, designer clothes, all her size, tailored for someone who used a wheelchair. There were flat shoes, adaptive dresses, pants without back seams. All thoughtful. All impossible to explain. How could he know so much about me? Later that day, after a silent breakfast delivered by a tight-lipped housekeeper named Sophia, Claire started exploring. Partially out of defiance. Partially to prove to herself that she wasn't a prisoner. She wheeled through corridor after corridor of marble and mahogany. The place was massive, curated, unnervingly quiet. Eventually, she turned down a hallway she hadn't seen before, lined with photographs, not of landscapes or abstract art, but personal photos. Black and white. Faded. Real. Claire wheeled closer. And then she saw it. A photo of a group of children standing stiffly in front of a stone building. The orphanage. St. Agnes Children's Home. Her orphanage. She leaned in. There she was, little Claire, maybe 5 years old, sitting in her early model wheelchair, hair in 2 neat braids. And behind her? A boy. Dark-haired. Protective hand on her shoulder. His eyes already carried that sharpness. That intensity. That same jawline. Jack. More photos. More proof. In every picture, the boy was never far. Holding her hand at a birthday party. Pushing her chair through snow. Sitting beside her in a chapel pew. The world tilted. He knew me. We were kids together. She gripped the frame as memories came rushing back, like flickers behind frosted glass. A soft voice reading to her at night. Strong arms lifting her when no one else could be bothered. A boy who stepped between her and the world, again and again. But the face had always been blurry. Like her mind wouldn't let her see it. Until now. I see you found them. She jumped at the voice. Jack stood behind her, silent as a ghost. But his eyes, they weren't cold now. They were distant. Wounded. You were there, Claire said, her voice barely audible. He nodded. Why didn't you tell me? You didn't remember. And honestly, I didn't think you were supposed to. Why? What happened to us? Jack hesitated, then stepped forward and took one of the photos from the wall, one where young Claire had fallen asleep in her chair, and young Jack was watching her with an expression that cut deeper than any words. I left the orphanage the night they tried to send me away, he said, voice tight. But before I did, I made a promise to protect you. Claire blinked through tears. I thought I was alone. You never were. The silence between them was heavy. Years heavy. A life's worth of hidden truths heavy. And for the first time, Claire realized. She hadn't just been rescued. She'd been remembered. Claire sat silently in the private study Jack led her into, a room that felt too personal for someone who called himself a stranger. The air smelled faintly of leather, old wood, and something else she couldn't name. Jack walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small, weathered box. He set it in front of her. Claire opened it slowly. Inside were scraps of a childhood, a faded ribbon from her hair, a small wooden bird, hand-folded drawings, and, at the bottom, a bracelet made of colored string. She sucked in a breath. I made this, she whispered. When I was 6. I gave it to you for your birthday. Jack nodded, his eyes distant. I wore it until it fell apart. She looked up at him. Why did you keep all this? Because it was the only part of my life that wasn't hell. Silence settled between them. Claire studied him, this man built like stone, carved from shadows. What happened after you left the orphanage? He sat across from her, elbows on his knees. The mask he wore, the billionaire, the tycoon, the myth, slipped. For the first time, she saw him. They were going to send me to a man named Kovac. Said it was a business opportunity. But everyone knew what it really meant. I was being sold. Traded. Recruited into something dark. Claire felt her stomach twist. I told them no, he continued. Told them I wouldn't go. That I had to stay. That I had to protect you. And? They laughed. Said if I didn't go, they'd find another buyer, for you. Claire's breath caught. So I went, he said, voice flat. To save you. The room felt suddenly smaller. Her heart beat louder than the ticking clock on the wall. And that man. Kovac? He trained me. Broke me. Built me. I did things I'm not proud of. I became someone people feared, because fear was the only currency that kept you safe in that world. He paused, then looked her dead in the eyes. Every dollar I made, every enemy I crushed, every empire I built, it was all so no one would ever touch you. Claire blinked. But I didn't know. I didn't remember any of it. I did, Jack said. Every day. Every year. I watched from a distance. Made sure your landlord never raised your rent. Made sure your boss gave you that promotion. That scholarship? I funded it. That apartment? I bought the building. You were always there? He nodded. But I never stepped in. Until that church. Until he humiliated you like you were worthless. And I realized, his voice cracked, I didn't build all of this just to watch you be broken. Claire reached across the space between them and took his hand. For the first time, he didn't pull away. You didn't save me, she said softly. You never let me fall. And in that moment, everything changed, not just between them, but within them. Because protection born from fear had become love born from sacrifice. 2 days later, Jack's world erupted. At 2:14 a.m., the perimeter alarm screamed. Security cameras blinked black. A shadow force had breached the edge of the estate, and this wasn't random. It was Castro, Jack's oldest enemy. A man who once called him brother, now hellbent on vengeance. And he wasn't aiming for Jack. He was aiming for Claire. Jack burst into the library, where Claire was reading by the window. It's him, he said, already issuing orders into his comms. Castro's coming. And he's coming for you. I'm not hiding, Claire replied instantly. You are not a soldier, Jack snapped. You're not part of this. I'm not your weakness, she shot back. I'm your partner. You said that. So let me help. He stared at her, this woman he'd once seen as someone to protect at all costs. Now, she was asking him to trust her with the cost. Then we play it my way, Claire added. Let him think I'm helpless. Let him underestimate me. A silence stretched between them. And then Jack nodded. Let's trap a ghost. By dawn, the plan was set. Claire would remain visible in the east drawing room, alone, framed by the tall windows, her wheelchair bathed in early light. A soft target. Vulnerable. Exposed. What Castro didn't know. The room was wired. Claire wore a mic under her blouse and a silent panic switch beneath her palm. The hallway behind her was lined with steel and sensors. The moment Castro crossed the threshold, the room would lock down. They waited. At 4:03 a.m., a soft creak echoed from the far hall. Shadows moved. Claire kept her breath steady. Then he appeared, tall, grizzled, his smile cruel. Castro. Well, he drawled, eyeing her like prey. You're even prettier up close. Don't come any closer, Claire warned, her hand already hovering near the switch. Your bodyguard's not here, he sneered. But don't worry. I won't hurt you, yet. I just want to leave Jack Callahan a message. He took one more step. Claire pressed the button. Steel panels slammed shut around them. Lights flickered. Gas hissed. Castro spun. What the? Before he could react, Jack's voice boomed from hidden speakers. You always underestimated the quiet ones. Then the side panel exploded open, and Jack stepped through the smoke. They fought. Hand to hand. Brutal. No guards. No weapons. Just two men with decades of rage between them. Castro slashed Jack's shoulder with a hidden blade, but Jack didn't flinch. He slammed him against the bookshelf, wrapped a chain from the fireplace around his wrist, and brought him to his knees. You came for her, Jack growled, blood trickling down his arm, and now you'll rot for it. Claire wheeled forward, locking eyes with Castro. Tell your men, she said coldly, Jack Callahan doesn't have weaknesses. He has allies. Castro said nothing. Just stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. And maybe he had. Because the girl he thought would scream and cower had just helped take him down. The sun had risen by the time it was over. Castro had been handed off to federal agents, facilitated, of course, through Jack's unofficial channels. The estate was still crawling with security, but the threat was gone. For now, the world was quiet. Jack sat on the edge of a stone bench in the garden, his shoulder freshly stitched, his dress shirt torn and stained. Claire wheeled up beside him, the hem of her dress trailing through dew-covered grass. Neither spoke at first. The adrenaline had faded. The blood had dried. All that was left was truth. You almost died, Claire whispered. Jack gave a small nod. Would have been worth it. She turned sharply. Don't say that. He looked at her then, really looked at her. No armor, no detachment. Just a man who had spent 20 years building a fortress out of fear, and who had just realized it wasn't strength that made him untouchable. It was love that made him powerful. I've spent my entire life protecting you from the outside, he said softly. But I never thought about what it would mean to let you in. Claire reached out, took his hand. Then start now. He stared at their intertwined fingers, his jaw working like the words were heavier than the bruises on his body. You don't have to stay, he finally said. You're free to leave. No cages. No pressure. If you want your old life back, I'll rebuild it better. Cleaner. Safer. You'll never have to see this world again. I don't want my old life back, Claire said gently. Jack froze. I want this one, she continued. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And because for the first time, I feel seen. Not as someone who needs saving, but as someone who belongs. He blinked, as if trying to absorb the words. You want to be part of this, he said slowly, even knowing everything I've done? Claire leaned in. I want to build something new. With you. Not behind you. Beside you. Jack stood, moving to kneel beside her wheelchair. His eyes shimmered with something she hadn't seen before, not dominance, not control, but hope. Then let me be clear, he said, voice low. I don't just want to protect you anymore. I want you with me. In my home. In my work. In my life. Every piece of it. He paused, then added, almost shyly, and in my heart. Claire smiled, eyes glassy. "Took you long enough." He exhaled a soft, shaky laugh, then leaned in and kissed her, not as a savior, but as an equal. As the morning light broke through the trees, something in both of them cracked open. Not pain. Not fear. Possibility. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, not as protector and victim, but as partners. In power. In purpose. And in love. 3 months later, the estate looked different. The walls had been rebuilt, not just with stone and steel, but with warmth. Fresh paint, sunlight pouring through widened windows, gardens blooming with color. The mansion still had guards, yes, but it also had life. Laughter. Music. People who stayed not out of fear, but loyalty. In the center of the newly restored courtyard, under a canopy of string lights and late summer stars, Claire and Jack stood face to face, this time, not in crisis, but in celebration. It wasn't a traditional wedding. There was no priest in white robes. No nervous father walking the bride down an aisle. Claire wheeled herself forward, radiant in an off-shoulder gown designed just for her body and her movement, elegant, unhidden. Jack waited, not with the stoicism of a mafia legend, but the vulnerable gaze of a man who had spent 2 decades fearing love, and now dared to claim it. Their vows weren't rehearsed. Weren't perfect. But they were theirs. "I used to think protection meant shielding you," Jack said. "But you showed me that real strength isn't standing in front of someone, it's standing with them." Claire reached for his hand. "And I used to think I had to prove my worth in a world that sees wheels before it sees the woman. But with you, I never had to perform. I just had to be." They exchanged rings, hers a deep sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, his a simple platinum band engraved with a word in Russian, Visha. His childhood name. The one only she was allowed to say. As the guests applauded, his inner circle, her newfound friends, Claire looked up at Jack with tears in her eyes and something stronger in her voice. "This isn't about saving each other." Jack nodded. "It's about rising together." Because their love wasn't born out of fantasy. It was built in fire, hammered by sacrifice, shaped by secrets, and reforged by truth. They had faced betrayal, violence, and the weight of old ghosts. But now they faced something even more powerful. Hope. That night, as the stars wheeled overhead and music floated across the estate, Jack and Claire danced, or rather, moved. He lifted her in his arms with ease, holding her close while the world faded around them. Not broken. Not rescued. Not defined by what they had survived. But reborn. Together. Fierce. Unstoppable.